Sorry about that. I'm actually going to get up and I'm going to mute my phone because I don't want to be disturbed while I'm doing this video. There. And sorry about that. Anyway, back to where we were. All right, so I do think this is a nice feature, but again, I loosened it so it's not keeping tension on that spring all the time. Otherwise, that spring's it's gonna lose the springiness to it, and it's gonna defeat the function of that. Another thing that I think is a good feature, and these come with a custom flag. One of the things about the HT devices, the HT tip-ups that I don't like, is I would like to see a larger flag, because when I fish, I do spread out my equipment quite a bit. So I can typically have tilts that are, 40, 50 feet away from me. And especially if it's, been snowing and the wind's blowing and you get that snow blowing across the ice, it's really nice when you can have a nice big flag up in the air when that flag goes up. But other than that, I love these. I love these tip-ups. They are probably, from my opinion, they're probably the best tip-ups on the market. I was fortunate. I bought them when they were a little bit less expensive. Nowadays, they're quite expensive. They run, depending on where you live or where you shop, you can get them from, I found them anywhere from $40 to $60, $65 each. Like I said, Heritage has a similar one, very similar design, and that one I do know in Massachusetts is currently on sale at, regular price. I shouldn't say sale, but being sold at Dick's Sporting Goods right now. I believe the other day it was $19.99, which is actually $20 for a tip-up. Not a bad price. All right. So equipment is important, and like I said, this video I'm going to focus more on setting up this equipment and having it ready to go. But before I do, I will reposition here a little bit, and I'll point out the fact that right here, let me move a couple of my tilts, get these out of the way. Right here I have a small bag. In this particular bag, for ice fishing, I prefer this. Reason being is because it's a very simple bag, which has 4 trays that slide in, and has a couple of pouches on the outside, and it's relatively small. This one here, again, I shop a lot at, and this is not an ad for Cabela's or Bass Pro. This is actually my first video, so I don't have any sponsors, and I'm not receiving any money for doing these videos. But I will admit that I do a lot of shopping at Cabela's and Bass Pro. And this bag was bought at Cabela's, and I actually like this bag because of the pockets, because of the little boxes inside. And if you look, you will notice that when I pull these out, I have one of these that is set up just with weights. The whole tray is nothing but different weights of split shot. So I can turn around, and if I need to add a little bit of extra weight to hold that shiner down, I can turn around and very quickly I can get into my bag, even with gloves on, nice big snaps. I can get this open, and I can pull out a little split shot to put on my line. I like to keep a couple of bullet weights as well. There's a bullet weight that slides on the line, and I do have some heavier weights. So if I do decide to fish for a larger catch, like a pike, and I'm going to put a heavier bait on, I can have enough weight to make sure I hold that line down, which is important. You got to make sure that your bait is where the fish are. All right, I'm going to slide this back in. I have one of these that's set up with all different hooks. We all have gear that we like, that we favor, and I will tell you that I do prefer, ask me why. Again, it's just a preference. but I use these red hooks, and they're actually put out by I like the company Gamakatsu, their hooks, and I buy a lot of their hooks. This particular pack is not the red ones, but I do prefer the red ones. But they have a very good line of hooks, and I use them a lot. I also use and I do these are actually worm hooks, but I also use the VMC. But hooks are just a preference. We all have a preference. I found a couple I like and I stick with them. But you go with what you like. Alright, I do have another tray. I already have this one out. And I want to be careful here because I have a lead that I made that already has a hook on it. And actually, since I've made this one, this is a very basic one, you know, which, you know, is set up for bass. But this one's got on it, it's got about a 4-foot lead. And you don't need a leader that's that long. You know, this one was set up for very deep water. And because the water was so deep, you know, I was able to give my live bait, I was able to give them a little bit more lead so they would move around a lot more. Again, I mentioned before about having that weight, that barrel weight, that's able to slide back and forth. And if you look, I use a split shot, okay? That way, if this weight sits on the bottom, the line can still continue to move and pull, but the weight will stay on the bottom. And that's why I do that. But again, you're only going to use this kind of setup if you're fishing in really deep water and you want to give the bait a lot of the ability to move around on its own. So the idea of the barrel weight is it holds that weight on the bottom, allows the line to move through it, and the bait can move around. And that's what this one was set up for. But right now I'm just going to tuck this away, hopefully in a way it's not going to wind up in my foot. Put that right over here for now and get that out of the way. In this tray, this tray right here, I do have some steel leaders. This is if I decide to go fishing for pike. If you're fishing for pike, you absolutely need a steel lead. Pike have very sharp teeth. They're carnivores, and they can snap through even a 20-pound test monofil or fluorocarbon line. They can snap through it like it's a 2-pound test. So if you're gonna fish for pike and even chain pickerel, a lot of times if you don't use a steel lead, a lot of times you can lose a good catch because they do have those teeth and they can cut the line. But in this box, I also have swivels. These are barrel swivels, and when I set up my rigs, I always set it up with a swivel because depending on what I'm fishing for, I'm going to want to change the length of my lead. I'm going to change my hook setup. I'm going to change, you know, my line setup based on my catch. So I always put a barrel swivel on my lines, on my tip-ups. And then the other thing I have in here, which is a little off-season, but I also have a pocket that does have some bobbers. And that is more obviously, you know, for open water fishing. But I can tell you I have in the past used a bobber. When I set my hook at the right depth, I can put a bobber, and that'll hold it up a little bit. And at the same time, when the fish takes off, it can pull under the ice. It's not my preferred method of doing it, but it is a fallback method, a backup plan. When I set up my tip-ups, whoop, there goes my bag. again, when you're working your house, you're always moving equipment, and I have to admit, you do sometimes make a mess. I apologize to my wife. I will get it cleaned up before you get home, I promise. All right. So this one has already been set up. So if you look, it's already been loosened. Okay. My tip-ups, they have the little hand crank, which is nice when you're reeling that line in. Getting ready, all I do is, and you're going to laugh, but I think an important piece of equipment is a simple rubber band. And I'll explain that later. But this one has been set up right now. So my line, these have a 40-pound ice fishing line. And any line will do as long as it's a braid line designed for cold water. And you want to have at least a 30-pound test. But I mean, I typically use 40. But there's not a fish out there right now. Even if you hook a pike, it's not likely that they're going to break a 40-pound test. And I can tell you right now, I can take this line and I can put a lot more than 40 pounds pressure. I've tested it. I've actually hooked on before. I've hooked on a weight and lifted it. And I'm able to lift 30 or 40 pounds and not have my knot come undone and not have the line break. So I'm very happy with a 40-pound test, and it works well. So one of the things I learned this from a guy I used to go ice fishing with. Unfortunately, him and I had a little bit of a falling out. For lack of a better explanation, he was one of those people that liked to go ice fishing when it was convenient for him on his terms at his place, and it was rarely a 50-50. And I do like to go fishing other places with my friends, but at the same time, I do have my favorite spots too, and I like to be able to visit those. And anyway, enough being said on that. One of the things he taught me, though, and this is actually a nice little trick. I used to determine my water depth by, and I still do, by using a sounder. And this is a typical one for ice fishing. And what you do is you turn around and you put this on your line. And I'll show you here. So again, I do have a swivel on this particular tilt. So this has a spring. You pull the spring back. You put it on your line, like so. And then the spring puts tension on it so you don't lose it. And then what you do is you take this and you let it go down until it hits the bottom. Okay? And then what I would do, and a lot of people have different ways of doing this. Some people will take and put a little knot in the line. I don't like to do that. The reason I don't like to do that is because that knot that you put in the line, it can create a kink in the line at that spot and create a weak spot on the line. So you're paying good money for a 40-pound test or whatever test you're using, and now you're putting a kink in the line that can weaken it in that spot. So I don't like to do that. What I was doing in the past is I would take a very small split shot and I would put it on the line, give it a simple squeeze, and you can slide that up and down on your line. And I would use that for marking my line. But one of the things my buddy had taught me, and I like it, is you can go to a Michael's or to a craft store, and you can buy a pack of these little micro buttons. They're very, very small buttons, typically used for crafts and stuff. And what you do is you put the button, and I don't know if you can see it there because of focus, but you put the line in one hole and out the other. And then when you're dropping your sounding bobber to the bottom, it gets to the bottom. And now if you were holding that button as you did it, now you use that button to mark the water. So now you want to bring that bait up off the bottom. So what you do is I typically like to bring it up about, depending on what I'm fishing, how deep the water is, but I typically want to bring it up about 1.5 to 2 feet. So what I'll do is I'll set this at the water's edge, and then I'll pick it up. Okay, so now I know that's where the water is, and then I'll take and I'll draw off about 1 foot to 1.5 feet, depending on how deep I want to set that hook. And that'll mark where I want the line to be set in the water. And then after I do that, so I turn around, I drop my line to the bottom. See, now it's loose. Okay, so it's on the bottom. Okay, you see when I lift it a little bit, it gets tight. When it hits the bottom, it gets loose. Okay, so when I hit the bottom, I set that button to the edge of the water. I bring back, we'll call it 2 feet of line, and then I take and I roll up the slack, so that button is now just on my reel. All right, and then this is going to sound a little odd, but from the spool to the ice is going to be about an extra 10 inches. Okay? So I like to go like 3 good turns on the spool more. And the purpose for doing that is to take into account the difference between here and here. Because when you put this in the air, you use the button to mark where the water is. But you got to remember, your reel is going in the water and it's going down about an extra 10 inches. That's why I do that. The other thing I do sometimes, rather than doing it the way I just described, is when I set my button, okay, like I said, that sounding bobber hits the bottom, I slide the button to the edge of the ice, okay, the button's at the edge of the water right there, okay. You can also move it down about 10 inches because that's where the spool's going to sit. And then you bring it up the extra foot or so to bring that hook up to the depth that you want. And I find that works really well. And that's typically what I will do. But you do what you want. You find the technique that works best for you and go with it, because that's what I've learned and I've always done. So right now I'm going to take my swivel out, and I'm going to put this back in with my fishing equipment. Anyway, like I said, I was watching my Patriots game. Halftime is more than over. I did want to talk a little bit about setting up my tilt. And so I'm going to take this as a good place to pause, and I'm going to say thank you for listening, and have a great day, and I'll see you next video. Thank you.